My daughter accidentally sent me a voice message meant for her husband. I listened to it twice. What I heard about me made me get in my car and leave with a plan that turned her life into a nightmare. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I was a lucky woman. Not rich, never that, but lucky in the ways that matter. I had my little house in Asheville, North Carolina, with the blue shutters I painted myself the summer after my husband, Gerald, passed. I had my garden, my Tuesday morning walks with my neighbor, Patrice, my Thursday pottery class at the community center. I had my daughter, Melissa, and for a long time I believed that was enough. More than enough, actually. Melissa had always been headstrong. Even as a girl, she had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were being evaluated and found slightly lacking. I chalked it up to intelligence. She was intelligent. I never denied that. She graduated top of her class, married a man named Derek who worked in finance, bought a beautiful house in Charlotte, and had 2 children, Lily and Connor. My grandchildren, the lights of my life. For most of her adult years, we had a cordial relationship. Not warm, exactly. Melissa was never warm, but functional. She called on Sundays, visited at Christmas, remembered my birthday. I visited them 4 or 5 times a year. I helped with the kids when they were small. I brought casseroles. I tried not to overstep. But over the past year or so, something had begun to shift. Small things at first. The kind of things you notice but immediately talk yourself out of noticing. She stopped asking about my health. She started answering my calls with a flat, clipped voice, like I was a bill collector. When I visited, Derek would disappear into his office almost immediately, and Melissa would keep glancing at her phone throughout dinner. Once, I overheard her tell Lily not to bother Grandma with her stories, but I was standing right there in the hallway holding a glass of sweet tea. That stung. I won't pretend it didn't. Still, I told myself it was stress. She had a demanding job, 2 kids, a busy husband. I told myself I was being sensitive. Then came the Sunday in October. I was sitting on my porch with my phone, waiting for Melissa's weekly call. It was cool out, the maple in the front yard just beginning to turn red at the edges. I had my coffee. I was in a good mood, actually, thinking about a pottery piece I'd been working on. A tall vase with a textured surface I was particularly proud of. My phone buzzed. Not a call, a voice message. From Melissa. I smiled, thinking she'd sent me something sweet, maybe a video of the grandkids. She did that occasionally. Those were my favorite moments. I pressed play. Her voice came through immediately, mid-sentence, like she'd started talking before she realized she was recording. And honestly, Derek, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending. She just shows up, takes over the kitchen, rearranges things, and expects us all to be grateful. She's lonely, and she's clingy, and she's exhausting. The kids don't even really like spending time with her. They're just too polite to say it. I love her, I guess, but she's just... God, she's so much. I honestly dread when she calls. I let it go to voicemail half the time and just text back. She has no idea. She really has no idea how annoying she is. The message was 53 seconds long. I listened to it once. Then I sat very still for a long moment, staring at the maple tree. Then I listened to it again. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I thought I'd misheard something. Maybe I thought the second listen would make it hurt less. It didn't. If anything, the second time, I heard things I'd glazed over the first time. The casual cruelty in her tone, the absence of any hesitation, the way she said I love her. I guess like she was describing a mildly inconvenient piece of furniture she couldn't bring herself to throw out. She really has no idea. I set the phone down on the armrest. My coffee was still warm. The maple tree was still beautiful. Nothing around me had changed at all, and yet I felt, in a very specific and quiet way, that everything was different now. I picked up my car keys from the side table. I always kept them there, and I walked to my car. I didn't bring my purse. I didn't leave a note. I just got in, backed out of the driveway, and started driving without any clear destination, with only one thought forming slowly in my mind, the way ice forms on the surface of a still pond. She has no idea. I thought, she's right. She has no idea. But she was about to find out. I ended up at a Cracker Barrel on the highway, about 20 minutes outside of Asheville. I don't know exactly why. Force of habit, maybe. Gerald and I used to stop there on road trips. I sat down in a corner booth and ordered coffee I didn't drink, and a piece of pecan pie I mostly just moved around the plate. At the next table, cut up a pancake for a small boy who couldn't have been more than 3. The boy looked at her with absolute adoration. I had to look away. I spent an hour in that booth just thinking, really thinking, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long time, because honest thinking about Melissa had always felt dangerous. I thought about the money first, because that was the easiest thing to quantify. Over the past several years, I had given Melissa and Derek significant amounts of financial help. $20,000 when they bought the Charlotte house, as a down payment gift. $7,000 for a kitchen renovation they called urgent. Smaller amounts, $500 here, $1,000 there, for the grandchildren's activities, for school supplies, for a car repair. Derek didn't want to go on credit. I had also, informally and without any contract, agreed to leave the house in Asheville to Melissa when I passed. We'd had a conversation about it about 3 years ago. She'd brought it up. Delicately, she thought, though I'd noticed the calculation in it. And I'd agreed, because I wanted her to be secure, because I was her mother. I pulled a small notepad from my coat pocket, I always kept one, and I started writing numbers. Just to see, just to make it real. By the time I was done, the number at the bottom of the page made me set my pen down very carefully, like it might explode. Over the course of Melissa's adult life, I had given or was planning to give her, conservatively, close to $200,000. Not counting years of free childcare. Not counting the weeks I'd come to Charlotte and cooked and cleaned while she recovered from her second C-section. Not counting the Sunday calls she let go to voicemail and then texted back. She's lonely, and she's clingy, and she's exhausting. Was I lonely? Yes, actually. I was 67 years old, and I had been widowed for 6 years, and I lived alone in a house with blue shutters, and some days the silence in that house was very loud. Was that a crime? Was that something to be spoken about with contempt to a husband in a voice message that got sent to the wrong person? Fear came next, the way it always does when the anger starts to cool slightly at the edges. What if I was overreacting? What if I confronted her and she turned it around on me? Melissa was skilled at turning things around. She had a way of restructuring a conversation until you weren't sure anymore whether the injury had been done to you or by you. I had watched her do it to Derek, to her friends, to her own children. I had watched her do it to me, and I had let her, because she was my daughter, and I had wanted to keep the peace. But sitting in that Cracker Barrel booth, I realized something that felt both simple and enormous. The peace I had been keeping was not my peace, it was hers. I had been managing my own behavior, my own voice, my own visits and phone calls and needs to preserve Melissa's comfort. And in return, I was exhausting. I was so much. I was being spoken about to her husband like an inconvenience she was nobly tolerating. No. I paid for my untouched coffee and my half-eaten pie, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for another 20 minutes. And in those 20 minutes, I made a decision. I was not going to confront Melissa. Not yet, and maybe not ever in the way she might expect. I was not going to cry into the phone. I was not going to send a wounded text message she could screenshot and show Derek as proof of my instability. I was going to be very, very quiet, and I was going to make some changes. The first thing I thought of was the will, the house. That conversation 3 years ago had been informal. Nothing was in writing. My current will was 12 years old, drafted when Gerald was still alive, and it needed to be updated anyway. I thought about my attorney, a kind and precise woman named Barbara Hensley I'd used for years. I thought about what a new will might look like. The second thing I thought of was the money. The informal loans, because I'd started thinking of them as loans now, even if they'd been given as gifts, were gone. But there was money in a savings account I'd been accumulating for the past few years, set aside for family needs, which had mostly meant Melissa's family needs. $22,000 sitting in an account Melissa knew existed. I took out my notepad again, and I started writing. Not numbers this time. Steps. Step 1, call Barbara. Step 2, review the savings account. Move funds. Step 3, say nothing. Not yet. The maple trees along the highway were turning too, the same brilliant red as the one in my front yard. I watched them through the windshield for a moment. The kids don't even really like spending time with her. That one was going to take longer to sit with. But right now, I had things to do. I called Barbara Hensley's office first thing Monday morning and made an appointment for Wednesday. I told her receptionist it was about updating my estate documents. Routine, I said. Nothing urgent. That was not entirely true. The drive to Barbara's office took me through downtown Asheville, past the farmer's market where Melissa and I used to go on Saturday mornings when she was a teenager. She used to love the honey vendor, a bearded man named Carl, who let her taste everything. I had not thought about that in years. I noticed I could think about it now, without the thought softening my resolve, which told me something important about where I was. Barbara Hensley was a small woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and an office full of spider plants. She had handled Gerald's estate with such quiet competence that I had trusted her ever since. I sat across from her desk and explained calmly that I wanted to revise my will. I wanted to remove the informal understanding that my daughter would inherit the house in Asheville. I wanted to leave the house instead to my 2 grandchildren, Lily and Connor, in equal shares, held in trust until they reached 25. I also wanted to formalize a donation of $15,000 to the Asheville Community Arts Center, which Gerald and I had always supported. And I wanted a new power of attorney. Not Melissa, as the current document designated, but my neighbor and longtime friend, Patrice Coleman. Barbara asked no unnecessary questions. She took notes. She said she would have a draft ready within 2 weeks. Walking out of her office into the October sunshine, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not grief, but a strange, clean sense of clarity. Like a window that had been foggy for years had been wiped clear. I did not call Melissa that Sunday. For 6 years, I had called her every Sunday, or waited for her call. That Sunday, I went to my pottery class in the morning, had lunch with Patrice, and spent the afternoon in the garden pulling up the last of the summer annuals. My phone rang at 2:14 p.m. Melissa. I looked at the screen. I let it ring. Is that cruel? I've thought about that. I don't think so. I think it was, for the first time in a very long time, simply honest. She texted 20 minutes later. Everything okay? You didn't pick up. I replied, fine. Busy day. Talk soon. The same energy she had given me, word for word, for the past year. She called again on Tuesday. I answered that time, kept it short, said I had someone at the door. She sounded slightly off balance, which I noted without pleasure but also without guilt. What I did not expect was the phone call I received on Thursday from my grandchildren's school. It was the administrative office at Lily and Connor's elementary school in Charlotte. They were calling to verify, and here they were apologetic, clearly uncomfortable, whether I had in fact been listed as an emergency contact for both children, and whether I was aware that my designation had been removed from their records approximately 3 weeks earlier. I asked them to repeat that. Removed 3 weeks ago. A parent had called in and made the change. They couldn't tell me which parent, for privacy reasons, but they wanted to confirm that I'd been notified since the previous paperwork had listed me as a secondary contact for over 4 years. I thanked them, kept my voice steady, and hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that call. This was not a mistake. This was not an oversight. This had been done deliberately, 3 weeks before the voice message, which meant the voice message was not an accident of frustration, a bad day, a vent that went too far. It was a window into something that had been building for a while, a process, the school removal, probably other things I didn't know about yet. She has no idea. I thought, what else don't I know? I called Patrice that evening. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I told her enough. I told her that I had reason to believe Melissa had been managing me more deliberately than I'd understood, and that I had started taking some steps to protect myself. Patrice, who had known Melissa since she was 12 years old and had never said a word against her in all that time, was very quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Honestly, Dorothy, I'm relieved you're finally seeing it." Finally. That word landed like a stone in still water. How long? I asked. At least since Gerald died, she said. I didn't want to be the one to say it. I looked out my kitchen window at the dark backyard. The maple tree was a silhouette against the orange streetlight. I thought about 6 years. I thought about what 6 years of not saying it looked like from the outside. I picked up my notepad. I added a 4th step below the first 3. Step 4. Find out what else has been changed, removed, or decided without my knowledge. I was going to need to know the full picture before I moved again. The revised will was signed on a Friday morning in early November. Barbara had been thorough and efficient, as always. The documents were clean and legally sound. The house would go to Lily and Connor in trust. Patrice was named power of attorney. The $15,000 donation to the Arts Center was formalized as a bequest. On my way home from Barbara's office, I stopped at my bank and transferred the $22,000 from the savings account Melissa knew about into a new account she did not. A personal account, in my name alone, with a new linked email address. The account manager, a young man named Travis who called me ma'am with genuine respect, helped me set it up in under an hour. I drove home feeling, again, that clean clarity, like I was slowly recovering the shape of my own life. I should have known Melissa would find out sooner rather than later. I suspect it was Derek who noticed first. He was the one who tracked finances in that household, the one who paid attention to numbers. I had mentioned the savings account to Melissa during a visit 2 years ago, casually, in the context of reassuring her that I had resources if I ever needed extended care. And she had filed that information away the way she filed everything, quietly, completely, for later use. On a Tuesday evening, 9 days after I signed the will, my doorbell rang. I was in the kitchen making soup. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door. Melissa and Derek were standing on my porch. They had driven 2 hours from Charlotte without calling first. Melissa looked the way she always did when she was containing something, perfectly composed on the surface, jaw slightly tight, eyes a little too still. Derek stood slightly behind her with the expression of a man who had been thoroughly briefed. "We need to talk," Melissa said. I stood in the doorway. I did not invite them in immediately. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. In a way, I realized I had stopped doing years ago, because looking too closely had always felt risky. She was 41 years old. She was wearing a camel coat and boots with a small heel. She looked like a woman who had driven 2 hours to handle a problem. I was the problem. "Come in," I said. I turned back to the kitchen. I did not offer to take their coats. We sat at the kitchen table. My soup simmered on the stove. The smell of it, chicken, thyme, the good kind of smell that fills a house, felt incongruous with what was happening. Melissa started carefully. She'd heard from the bank, she didn't say how, exactly, that there had been some account activity. She was concerned. Was everything all right? Was I being scammed? There were people who targeted women my age, she said, with a solicitousness that did not reach her eyes. I told her I was fine. I told her I had made some financial adjustments I felt were appropriate. Then Derek leaned forward. His voice was pleasant in the way that a very sharp thing can look smooth until it moves. He said that he understood I'd also been to see an attorney. He said that changes to estate plans were the kind of thing families should discuss together. He said he hoped I hadn't made any decisions I might regret. I looked at him for a moment. "Derek," I said, "how did you know I'd been to see my attorney?" He said Barbara's office was in a small town. I said that was not an answer to my question. A silence settled over the kitchen. Outside, a car passed on the street. The soup bubbled quietly. Melissa shifted tactics. Her voice dropped into something softer, wounded. She said she felt shut out. She said she thought we had an understanding about the house, about the future, and that it hurt her to feel like that was being reconsidered without explanation. She said she was worried about me. She said the word alone several times. That I was alone. That she worried about me being alone. That she wanted to be sure I had support. Every instance of the word alone landed like a small, deliberate bruise. I thought of the voice message. She's lonely and she's clingy. I thought of the school records. 3 weeks before the message. "Melissa," I said quietly, "I know you meant that message for Derek." The room went completely still. Her face moved through several things very quickly. Shock, calculation, and then something that settled into a cold, careful blankness. "I don't know what You sent it to me by mistake," I said. "On a Sunday in October. I listened to it twice." Derek looked at Melissa. Melissa looked at me. Neither of them spoke. "I'm not angry," I said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough. "I am, however, making different decisions than I was making before I heard it. That's my right." Melissa stood up. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had lost every trace of the wounded softness. "You're going to regret this," she said, not loudly, quietly, which was worse. Derek stood too. He said, with a smile that didn't belong anywhere near a smile, that I should think carefully before I burned bridges. He said family was important. He said he hoped I had good advice around me. I walked them to the door. I said goodnight. I closed the door behind them and stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to their car start and pull away. My hands were perfectly steady, but when I got back to my soup, I found I wasn't hungry anymore. I put it in a container in the refrigerator and went to bed early. For the next 4 days, I did very little. I went to pottery class. I walked with Patrice. I watched old films Gerald had loved and hadn't been able to convince me to watch when he was alive. I slept more than usual. I let myself be, for a small stretch of time, simply a 67-year-old woman in a house with blue shutters who had done something difficult and needed to recover from it. On the 5th day, I made a fresh cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table with my notepad, and thought about what came next. The text came on a Wednesday morning while I was washing my breakfast dishes. "Mom, I've been thinking. I'm sorry if the visit felt tense. I just worry about you. Can we talk this week? I love you." I read it twice. Not because I was uncertain about its meaning, but because I wanted to be sure I was reading it accurately, the way you look at a document twice before you sign it. I'm sorry if the visit felt tense. Not, I'm sorry for what I said. Not, I'm sorry you heard that message. The apology was for my feelings, not for her actions. A very particular distinction, and one Melissa had always been expert at maintaining. I set the phone face down on the counter and finished washing my dishes. That Friday, Lily called me. My granddaughter was 11 years old, bright and sensitive, and entirely innocent of whatever her mother was using her for. She called from what I could tell was her bedroom. I could hear the particular acoustic of that small space. And she told me she missed me and asked if I would come visit soon. She said, in the careful way of a child who has been coached without knowing it, that she hoped Grandma and Mommy weren't fighting, because it made her sad. I told her I loved her. I told her she had nothing to worry about. I told her I would see her very soon, and I meant it. After I hung up, I sat with the feeling for a long time. The use of Lily was the thing that made me the most tired. Not angry. Tired. Like looking at someone do something they don't even realize is beneath them. Here is the thing about cold calm. People often mistake it for coldness, for detachment or cruelty or the absence of feeling. But that is not what it is. Cold calm is what happens when you have felt the thing fully, the grief, the anger, the disbelief, and you have made a decision not to be governed by it. It is not the absence of feeling. It is feeling that has been organized. I was not cold. I was organized. And I realized, still learning how isolated I had allowed myself to become. I had Patrice. But who else, truly? My Thursday pottery class. Yes. But I had always kept those friendships pleasant and light, never deep. I had a sister in Oregon, Renata, 3 years younger than me, whom I had not called in nearly 8 months because Melissa had always found reasons why our relationship was complicated. Small comments here and there over years that had quietly depreciated that connection. Had I noticed that happening at the time? I searched my memory honestly. Partly. I had noticed and told myself I was being uncharitable. I called Renata that Saturday. We talked for 2.5 hours. She cried at one point, which was unusual for her. She said she had thought I was angry with her. I told her I was not angry with her, that I had not been angry with her, and that I was sorry for the silence. She said she was just glad I'd called. After we hung up, I called the director of the Asheville Community Arts Center, a woman named Gloria Marsh, whom I'd met through the donation bequest Barbara was processing, to discuss the details of the gift. Gloria was warm and practical and entirely delighted, and by the end of our conversation, she had invited me to join their volunteer advisory group, which met the first Monday of every month. I said yes. Then, on impulse, I went to my Thursday pottery class 2 days early, on a Tuesday, because they had open studio hours I'd never taken advantage of. There were 6 people there I half knew. By the end of the evening, I had made plans to have lunch with one of them, a retired teacher named Helen, who had a wry sense of humor and made extraordinarily beautiful bowls. Was I building something? Yes. I was building something I should have been building for years, but had not, because I had directed the energy of it toward a daughter who found it exhausting. I was 67 years old. I had good years ahead of me, and I intended to fill them well. Melissa texted again on Sunday. Mom, please, I really do want to talk. I replied, I know you do. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. And then I put the phone in my purse and drove to Renata's favorite kind of restaurant, a Chinese place I'd never been to, because she had described it to me in such detail during our phone call that I felt I already knew it, and I wanted to find out if she was right. She was. They came on a Sunday afternoon in late November, and this time they brought the children. I heard the car in the driveway from my kitchen window. I saw all four of them get out: Derek in a weekend sweater, Melissa in the camel coat again, Lily running toward my door, Connor dragging his feet slightly in the way of a 9-year-old boy who would rather be anywhere with a screen. I watched for a moment before I went to the door. Was it a calculation, bringing the children? Of course it was. Was it also possible that part of Melissa genuinely wanted to smooth things over? Possibly. Human beings are rarely operating from a single motive. But I had spent enough time thinking about this to know that possible was not the same as sufficient. I had also spent the previous week rereading the voice message transcript I'd typed out for myself the day after I heard it. All 53 seconds of it, word for word, and that document had a clarifying effect every time. I opened the door. Lily threw her arms around my waist with the uncalculating love of an 11-year-old, and I held her tightly, because that was real, whatever else was happening. We went inside. I made cocoa for the kids, coffee for the adults. We sat in the living room, Melissa and Derek on the sofa, me in the armchair. Gerald and I had bought at an estate sale the year we got married. Lily curled up beside me on the arm of the chair. Connor was given permission to play on a tablet at the kitchen table. For the first 30 minutes, it was almost pleasant. Derek talked about his work in the vague way he always did. Lily showed me a drawing she'd made. Melissa asked about my pottery class, with what seemed like genuine interest. I answered calmly, without warmth and without coldness, because Lily was watching. I was aware all the while of the performance underneath the performance, the careful staging of normalcy, like a set designer arranging furniture to suggest a home rather than building one. Then the children drifted, Lily to the kitchen with Connor, Derek to his phone, and Melissa and I were alone. She started gently. She said she understood she'd hurt me. She didn't say how or specifically with what, just that she understood there had been hurt, in the passive way that locates pain without accepting responsibility for causing it. She said she wanted us to get back to where we'd been. I thought where we'd been was a place where I gave freely and was discussed contemptuously. I did not say this. She said she was worried the decisions I'd been making, she used finger quotes, barely perceptibly, might not reflect what I really wanted. She said that grief could make people do things. She said she had a friend who was a therapist. She named a woman I didn't know, who specialized in older adults navigating loss and change, and she thought it might be helpful for me to talk to someone. There it was. The implication was gentle and very carefully constructed. The changes I had made were not the products of sound judgment. They were symptoms. I was grieving. I was isolated. I was perhaps not entirely myself. The decisions, the will, the accounts, the attorney, could then be understood not as deliberate and legitimate choices, but as the confused actions of a woman who needed guidance, preferably hers. It was, I thought, an elegant construction, the kind of thing that sounds like care and functions like a cage. "I'm not confused, Melissa," I said. She tilted her head. "I know you feel that way, Mom." There was something in that response, the particular gentleness of it, the soft refusal to accept my self-assessment as valid. That was, I realized, the most condescending thing she had ever said to me. More condescending than the voice message, in its way. The message had been careless. This was deliberate. Derek returned from his phone. He sat down and said, conversationally, that he wanted to be transparent. He'd looked into the legal standing of informal agreements regarding property, and he thought, I should know that if my intentions toward the house had been made explicit over the years, in letters, emails, conversations witnessed by others, there could be a basis for a claim. I looked at him. "Are you telling me you're considering suing me for my house?" He spread his hands. Not a yes, not a no. "I'm saying family situations can get complicated when people make decisions in haste. The attorney found me to be fully competent, I said. She's required to assess that before executing documents of this kind. A small silence. Outside, a car passed on the street. The winter light through the windows was thin and flat. I thought about how many times I had sat in this same room with these same two people, in how many configurations of the same conversation, and how many times I had allowed the conversation to end in their favor because I was afraid of what happened if it didn't. Then Melissa's voice shifted again. The gentleness was gone, not dramatically. She didn't raise her voice, but it was gone. She said she was tired of being made to feel like a villain. She said she had spent years worrying about me, accommodating me, managing a relationship that frankly took more out of her than I understood. She said she had needs too. She said that whatever I thought I'd heard in that message, I had taken it completely out of context. What context? I asked. Removes the school records? She went very still. 3 weeks before you sent me that message, I said, you removed me as emergency contact from Lily and Connor's school. I found that out accidentally from the school's administrative office. What context applies to that? Derek put his hand on Melissa's arm, which was the most telling thing he'd done all afternoon. Melissa stood up. She said they would give me some time to think. She said she hoped I would consider what I was doing to our family. She said that Lily loved me and that it would be a shame. She used that word, shame, if my decisions affected the children's relationship with me. That was the threat, dressed in sadness and concern, but a threat. And it was meant to land in a particular place, the place in me that loved those children more than I could measure. She knew exactly where to aim it because she had known me for 41 years. They called the children, said they needed to head back. Lily hugged me for a long time and asked when she would see me again. I told her soon. I kissed the top of her head. Connor gave me a side hug and went to the car. Melissa kissed my cheek, the most impersonal gesture imaginable. And they left. I closed the door and stood in the hallway. Was I afraid? Yes. Briefly. Genuinely afraid. The mention of a legal claim, even framed as transparency and not a threat, was designed to frighten me. The implied control over the grandchildren's access was designed to frighten me. It had all been very carefully designed. But then I thought about Barbara Hensley's office. I thought about the drafts I had signed. I thought about Travis at the bank, who had confirmed that my new account was properly structured. I thought about Patrice's name on the power of attorney. I thought about Renata's voice on the phone saying, "I'm just glad you called." I thought about all the things I had put in place, quietly and methodically, over the previous weeks. I had not acted in haste. I had acted carefully, legally, with professional guidance. The fear was real, and it became, almost immediately, fuel. It was Renata who gave me the idea for the meeting. We'd been talking in early December. Our calls had become weekly by then, long and easy in the way they'd been when we were young. And I told her everything. The voice message, the school records, the visit with the children, Derek's suggestion about legal claims. Renata, who had been a paralegal for 20 years before she retired, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Dorothy, you need to get this all in one place and let them see that you see it. Not in a letter. In person." I thought about that for a week. Then I called Melissa and told her I'd like us all to sit down together, her, Derek, and me, to address some things properly. I said I thought it would be better than continued back and forth. I said I would come to Charlotte if they preferred. Melissa agreed, with a promptness that told me she thought this was a surrender. It was a Saturday, the second weekend of December. I drove to Charlotte. The house was decorated for Christmas, a wreath on the door, a tree visible through the front window. Normal, ordinary, lovely. I had helped decorate that house in years past. I had carried boxes of ornaments up from their basement and untangled lights on their kitchen floor, and drunk mulled wine while Lily placed the angel on top with tremendous ceremony. Those memories existed. They were real, and they did not change what else was also real. I had asked Patrice to know where I was going and to expect a call from me by 5 p.m., just in case. That is the kind of thing you think about when you are 67 and doing something that requires courage. Melissa let me in. Derek was already in the living room, sitting in an armchair with a careful casualness that told me he'd been positioned for a while. The children were at a friend's house, which was both appropriate and, I suspected, deliberate. We sat down. Melissa offered coffee. I declined. She was in the careful, composed mode again, the jaw slightly tight, the eyes still. Derek had the smooth pleasantness of a man who had prepared remarks. "I'm glad we're doing this," Melissa began. "Let me start, if you don't mind," I said. A slight pause. I saw her recalibrate. A small, quick adjustment behind the eyes, like a camera refocusing. She was not accustomed to me going first. I had brought a folder. Not thick, just a few pages. I set it on the coffee table between us. "Last Sunday in October, you sent me a voice message by mistake," I said. "I've kept a copy of it. I'm not going to play it, but I want you to know it exists and that I have documented its contents." Melissa's mouth tightened. "3 weeks before that message, you removed me as emergency contact from Lily and Connor's school. I have written confirmation of this from the school's administrative office, with the date." Derek shifted in his chair. "When you came to my house in November, Derek, you suggested there might be legal grounds for a claim on my property based on expressed intentions over the years. I have reviewed this question with my attorney. There is no such basis. No written agreement exists, no witnessed verbal contract, and my current, signed, legally executed, will reflect my actual and considered wishes. Barbara Hensley is prepared to confirm my full competence at the time of signing." The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down the street, children were playing. I could hear their voices faintly, bright and unmistakable. The contrast with the silence in that living room was stark. "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm here to be clear. The changes I've made are permanent and legal. They are not symptoms of grief or confusion. They are the decisions of a person who finally had enough information to make them." Melissa spoke. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the thing beneath it. Not grief, not guilt, but the particular fury of someone whose plan is not working. "You're punishing me for a private conversation I had with my husband. I'm adjusting my life based on information I received," I said. "I'm entitled to that." "You had an agreement about the house?" "I had a conversation, an informal one with nothing in writing, which I am fully within my rights to revisit." "You're being vindictive." "I'm being accurate." Derek cut in, his voice harder now, the pleasant surface fully gone. "You're going to damage your relationship with your grandchildren over this. You understand that?" And there it was. Brought out from the polished wood cabinet where it had been stored, finally used as the explicit weapon it had always been intended to be. He'd been more careful with it in previous conversations, had kept it wrapped in suggestion. Now he'd set it down bare on the table between us, and I thought he immediately knew, from whatever he saw in my face, that he had made a mistake. I looked at him very steadily. "Derek, Lily called me because she loves me. Connor hugged me on the porch last month because he loves me. Children's love is not a financial instrument. I trust them to know me." "We control their schedules," he said. Melissa put her hand on his arm. The same gesture he'd used to stop her in November, reversed now. She was telling him he'd gone too far, but it was too late. You cannot unsay a thing like that. It had been said, in this room, with the December light coming through the window and a Christmas tree in the corner, and we all three knew what it was. I had not planned to say the next thing, but I had thought about it and it came out calmly. "I've spoken with a family law attorney about grandparent visitation rights in North Carolina," I said. It was an informational conversation. I hope it remains informational. The shift in the room was almost physical. Derek's smooth pleasantness cracked at the edges. Melissa went a shade paler. The easy confidence they had carried into the room, the confidence of people who believe they are dealing with someone manageable, was gone. And what was underneath it was not attractive. "You're serious," she said. "Not a question." "I'm always serious," I said. "I've been serious this whole time. I think the mistake was assuming I wasn't." They spoke over each other for a moment. Derek saying something about overreach, Melissa saying something about hurtfulness, their voices layering in the way of people who have lost the script. I waited. I did not interrupt. I let it exhaust itself. "I love you, Melissa," I said, when there was quiet again. "I have loved you every day of your life, but I am not going to live in a version of our relationship that requires me to be grateful for contempt. That version is finished." I picked up my folder. I stood up. I looked at my daughter, at her face, at the effort it was costing her to hold the composure she had always worn like a second skin. And I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph and not grief, but a kind of sorrow for what we might have been, alongside a clear and absolute certainty that I had done the right thing. "I hope we can do better, but that depends on you, not on me." I drove home from Charlotte in the early evening dark, the highway lights sliding past. Christmas music on the radio that I didn't turn off even though it felt slightly strange. By the time I reached Asheville, the fear I'd carried for weeks had been replaced by something I could only describe as a great, clean tiredness. Good tired, the kind that comes after labor, not defeat. I sat in my driveway for a few minutes before going inside. The blue shutters were dark in the evening light, and the maple tree was bare now, its branches clean and precise against the sky. I thought, I planted that maple with Gerald the year we moved in. It had been a sapling then. I thought about things that are planted in good faith and grow into themselves over decades, and I thought that was what I was doing now, at 67, which was not too late. Barbara called me on Monday. She had received an inquiry from a Charlotte attorney, on behalf of Derek and Melissa, it turned out, regarding the estate revisions. She handled it with her usual precision, which I gathered from her tone meant efficiently and completely. There was no basis for a challenge. The revisions were sound. My competency was documented. The informal conversation about the house, which had never been witnessed, had no legal standing whatsoever, Barbara said, without editorializing. She was not an editorializing woman. That this appeared to be the end of it from a legal standpoint. I thanked her and sent a small poinsettia to her office, which she texted to say was very pretty. Derek's suggestion about legal claims had been, as I'd suspected, a bluff. A well-dressed bluff from a man who worked in finance and was accustomed to using the language of consequence to steer outcomes. But words are not deeds, and intimidation that finds a prepared opponent tends to collapse quietly. I had been prepared. That was the whole point. Every step I had taken since that October Sunday, the attorney, the accounts, the documentation, the conversations with Patrice and Renata, had been preparation, not revenge. Preparation. The school received a call from me shortly after, asking to be reinstated as emergency contact for Lily and Connor. The school, after a brief verification process and some communication with Melissa, which I was told was resolved with no details, reinstated me within a week. I was told by the very kind administrative coordinator that the previous change had apparently been made in error. She said this with diplomatic neutrality. I accepted it the same way. Some victories do not need to be named aloud to be real. Gloria Marsh at the Art Center formally acknowledged my bequest in a letter that I framed and put on the wall of my study, next to a photograph of Gerald. It looked right there. It looked like it belonged. The bequest was not about money, exactly, though $15,000 is $15,000. It was about the fact that I had chosen where my resources went, deliberately and with love, towards something that had meaning for me. That choice had been mine. That is what the framed letter said to me every morning when I walked past it. I joined the volunteer advisory board. The first meeting was crowded and warm and full of people who were interested in things I was interested in. At the coffee table afterward, a man named Francis, who restored vintage furniture as a hobby, asked about my pottery work, and we talked for 40 minutes. I drove home smiling in a way that felt unforced, which I noted with quiet gratitude. Renata came to visit for a week in early January. She slept in the guest room that had been used mostly for storage since Gerald died, and that I had quietly transformed, over the previous weeks, into a real room again. Fresh linens, a lamp with warm light, a small painting I'd always loved on the wall. She stood in the doorway when I showed her and was quiet for a moment. She said it was beautiful. She said it looked like a room that expected someone. I thought that was exactly right. Week. We walked in the mornings. On the week. We walked in the mornings. On the last night she was there, we sat on the porch with wine and talked until past midnight, the way we had as girls sharing a bedroom. Voices low in the dark, solving the world. From Melissa, there was silence. Not the hostile kind. More like the silence of recalibration, of someone who has played several moves and found none of them effective and is reconsidering the board. I didn't fill the silence with reassurance. I'd spent years filling silences I hadn't created. The impulse was still there, trained in deep by decades. But I recognized it now for what it was, and I let it pass. She called in late January, a Sunday, the old rhythm, and I answered. The conversation was short and careful on both sides, like two people speaking across a surface that was still fragile. She asked how I was. I told her I was well. She mentioned that Lily had been asking about me. I said I'd love to see Lily, and we made a loose plan for a visit in February. The visit happened. Lily came alone with Melissa, without Derek, which felt like a choice on Melissa's part that I noted but didn't comment on. We went to the farmer's market. Lily tried honey from Carl. Yes, he was still there, still bearded, still generous with samples. And I watched my daughter watch her daughter. And for a moment, something in Melissa's face was simply human, unguarded, the way she'd been as a girl. Standing in the winter light between the vendors' stalls, with Lily reaching up on her toes to try a second variety of honey, Melissa almost looked like someone I recognized from a long time ago. I didn't trust it yet, but I saw it, and I kept it carefully in the place where I stored things worth watching. Connor called me the following week, entirely unprompted, to tell me about a book report he'd done on Benjamin Franklin, who he'd discovered was actually kind of weird and interesting. I told him I agreed completely. We talked for 20 minutes. When we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand, thinking about how that call had felt, easy and warm and entirely normal. And I thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. These were not the fruits of surrender. They were the fruits of clarity, of a woman who had decided, finally, what she was and wasn't willing to accept, and had acted on that decision with legal standing, emotional steadiness, and the full use of her own capable mind. I had not destroyed my family. I had restructured it around truth instead of performance. And if that was the hardest thing I'd ever done, it was also, by some distance, the most useful. By the following autumn, my life had become something I recognized with pleasure rather than resignation. I was on the advisory board of the Arts Center and had helped secure a small regional grant, more satisfying than I would have predicted. Helen, the retired teacher, had become a genuine friend. We had standing Thursday lunches now, Renata visited 3 times that year, and I went to Oregon once, the first time in 4 years, walked on the coast, ate seafood, and felt very simply like myself. Francis, who restored furniture, had asked me to a lecture at the university, and then to 2 more things after that. I was not sure yet what that was, and I was not in a hurry to decide. My pottery had improved markedly, and I had sold 3 pieces at a local gallery. The house with the blue shutters felt entirely mine in a way it had only been partially before. What was happening in Charlotte? I learned in pieces, through Lily, who talked freely, through Connor's occasional calls, through Renata. Derek's finances were less stable than they had been. There had been some difficulty at his firm. Lily said, "Daddy's been home a lot," in a tone that contained its own information. The large Charlotte house carried a large mortgage, and the kitchen renovation loan, on top of my contribution, had, it turned out, been drawn for more than the renovation required. I felt no satisfaction about this. What I felt was the quiet recognition that cause and effect are real, and that the strategies they had practiced on me, they had likely practiced elsewhere too. Melissa called more regularly now, and with more honesty. She said once, quietly, that she was sorry, without specifying for what. The apology was not sufficient for everything, but the fact that she offered it was the most honest thing she'd done in years. The grandchildren were constant and lovely. Lily spent a long weekend learning pottery with great concentration and very little success and enormous satisfaction. Connor borrowed Gerald's books 2 at a time, returning them pressed and careful as library books. On a Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year after The Maple had been read and I had listened to a voice message twice on my porch, I sat in that same spot with my coffee. The Maple was read again. A year is a complete thing. No missed calls, no waiting voicemails, no silences I was responsible for filling. The coffee was good. The morning was cool and quiet and entirely my own. If there is one thing I want you to take from Dorothy's story, it is this. Information is a gift, even when it arrives by accident. That voice message was 53 seconds of cruelty. It was also 53 seconds of truth I had needed for years. I did not become cruel. I did not become vindictive. I became clear. We teach ourselves to endure what we believe we must, but endurance without examination is just another word for slow loss. What would you have done? If you had listened to that message twice and sat with it in the quiet, what would you have decided? I'd love to know. Leave a comment below. And if Dorothy's story stayed with you, share it. Someone out there might need to hear it. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. It means more than you know.